MotoGP at the Sachsenring in Germany. What a race.
What a race indeed. We missed a couple of the races. Now we're back with MotoGP and we'll get into everything after the intro.
Let's do it. All right, guys, welcome back to the Daily Racing Show here at RacePlazaMedia. My name is Milan.
My name is Pia.
And we had the pleasure of watching the MotoGP race this past weekend, and I'm glad we didn't miss it.
Woo! What a pleasure it was indeed to watch the race.
Yes, even though I knew one big thing that would happen, and essentially I knew the race winner.
I had no idea going into this. Yeah. I thought you were watching it clean slate as well because you were so into it and because it was such an interesting race. I mean, from the beginning, we had heard that Marquez had some trouble during qualifying. I didn't quite know what the issues were, but then at the end, we found out there were some technical issues. He had this big crash where he broke a finger. He
bruised his ribs.
Bruised a couple of ribs. So he was already beat up and he started in 13th position, which was, of course, a little bit further back than I personally would like to see him, but he has proven previously that he can move through the pack. So I was optimistic that
I think in fourth row he finished. He started. Right?
Yeah, so I'm
3, 6, 9, 12.
Yeah. So yeah, so I was optimistic that we would see him fighting for the podium.
Yeah.
But boy, oh boy, was that an interesting race. So.
Yeah, also because Marc Marquez, so like we mentioned, we missed the last two races because, it's been the Euros, it's been the Copa America, so there's lots of sports to watch. Yes. So something will just fall off, and we've been watching F1, I've watched F2.
Yeah.
And you were also working on the weekend. Anyways, but we had previous races where Marc was starting from the back row, and then he made his way up to the front. And because he has won the Sachsenring 9 times already, so I was confident that he wasn't going to finish in 13th place. He was going to make it to the front.
Yes.
We just didn't know where he was going to end.
Yes.
And I would say up until I think maybe 5 or 3 laps, 5 laps to go, I was like, he will finish on 4th.
Yeah, well, let's start at the beginning. I mean, the beginning started off, Jorge Martin started in pole. Then we had Rolf.
Bastianini.
Oliveira was up there in the front. We had Frankie Morbidelli was up there. Then, of course, we had Pecco Bagnaia. So, I mean, it was an interesting start of the grid. Pecco had, I think he had a decent start. He had a little bit of a wheelie going off of the start. And it was so much fun fighting. I mean, I've not seen so much Frankie Morbidelli on camera action this entire season. I mean, granted, this is our first season, so we're still a little bit new to it.
So Pecco was 3rd after the start, but then he picked off Morbidelli pretty quickly because he knew kind of if I don't do it now, he might be losing the gap to the front. But then actually Morbidelli ended up fighting back.
Yes.
And he ended up switching positions. So Morbidelli was in 2nd and Pecco was in 3rd. And in his post-race interview, Pecco also said that he thought that especially Jorge was pushing too much and that he was just going to hold back for a little bit and then attack towards the end, which we've seen many races now being decided really in the last 5 laps.
Yeah.
And once again, this race as well.
Yeah.
So once again, MotoGP is incredibly competitive.
And I mean, I have to say it, every time I watch it, it looks so badass.
It is, yes.
It looks
especially
so
those slow-mo
cool.
shots.
I mean, when they really lie down in the corner, it just, I think it looks visually even cooler than F1, just because physically you can see the amount of work that they do, because in an F1 car you don't see it visually as much. So when you see them just lying down in the corner, touching, scraping the ground, and then also there was a moment a little bit later on in the race, there was some fighting between Morbidelli and Marc Marquez, and then Morbidelli's tire got onto Marc Marquez's thigh, I think it was. You can see the scrape, and then Marc Marquez didn't flinch. It was
but
nothing.
He also he kind of hopped on the race, so on the bike, so he had air off of the seat of his bike, and then he bounced back on, and it was honestly, it was a really close call because.
Oh, I was talking about a different moment.
Oh,
But
sorry,
yes.
sorry.
No,
I
no,
thought you
no.
were talking about that moment.
No. I was talking before that. A moment happened where he just touched, like Morbidelli's, I think it was like front tire touched Mark Marquez's thigh, and you can see the scraping of it on his suit. And it's just, I think it just looks so cool. I didn't think after watching our first race, and we've talked about this before, because the first race wasn't quite as exciting. I was like, oh, I'm not sure if I can get into MotoGP. But boy, oh boy, was I wrong. This has been
MotoGP
such
lit.
a fun season. Of course, not every race is this exciting.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's the same with all other sports. Not every game, not every race is quite as exciting. But this race today was insane. So we had Bastianini, not Bastianini, Bagnaia and Morbidelli fighting for a little bit. But then eventually Frankie went a little bit further back. He was also then passed by Alex Marquez. They had a little bit of fighting for a while. So it was Alex, then it was Frankie, and then it was Mark.
Yes.
Which was really cool to see. It was like a little sandwich.
Yeah. Sandwich between the brothers. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, but eventually Alex drove away like a couple seconds ahead.
Because he also had, I think he had clean air.
Yes.
So, and then he was able, and because obviously Morbidelli and Marc Marquez, they were keeping each other kind of busy.
Yeah.
Because Morbidelli was under constant attack by Marc Marquez. So he was able to like drive out, like I would say maybe like a 2-second gap. 2-second gap to Morbidelli.
And then on lap 9, or with 9 laps to go, your incident happened.
Exactly. So Morbidelli and Marc Marquez kind of came together. It was more like a racing incident. They were both on different. Morbidelli kind of took the corner a little wider. Marc Marquez was like, okay, I'm gonna of course take it really, really tight, which is usually what they do. And then when their racing lines kind of came together, that's when they kind of touched. And Marc Marquez literally, like his bike was twisting, and he lifted off the seat of his bike, got back on, and he said in his post-race interview that really woke him up. I guess the pain of like his ribs crunching and his finger, being broken, and then he was like, okay, this like really shook him out of it, and then he went on the attack, and he did, and he within then a few, I think within a lap or two, he ended up then passing Morbidelli, and then he had I think we had 4 laps to go. And he was 2 seconds behind his brother. And we're like, okay. And the commentator said this might go down into like the last corner or last turn of the track, last lap.
Yeah.
But with like 2 laps to go, Mark already caught Alex.
Bonkers.
Which is crazy. To be fair, Alex obviously wasn't fighting as much.
Yeah.
They don't really fight on track. They're also driving for the same team.
Yes.
And Mark being further ahead in the championship, it just kind of makes sense.
Yes. I don't know if there were team orders, but there was...
Because it's kind of hard because they can only give team orders when they're passing the straight towards the finish line.
But it's also like Mark's pace was just insane. He made up over half a second per lap.
Yeah.
I mean, that's crazy. But what I was also going to mention for the Morbidelli incident, like Marc Marquez's airbag activated.
Oh, yes.
So that's what also, like with his bruised ribs, that put pressure on his ribs. And yes, it deflates, but it takes a little bit of time. So the commentators are also saying that Marc Marquez is such a masochist.
Yeah.
That because of the pain, and it's like...
Well, the airbag goes on, and it's probably like someone punching you directly into that thing where you had a terrible crash the day before, which is... In MotoGP, you have essentially a top side or a low side crash. The low side is one essentially where you just kind of like you lose grip and you slide out, which is the safest type of accident you can have. And then the top side is when you essentially fly topside.
Like almost like catapult.
You get catapulted off the bike over it. And that's what he had. So he had a really, really terrible crash, the day before, and they were able to put the bike back together, get over the technical difficulties. And the thing about it is generally known that he is on a Ducati, but he's on the slower Ducati.
Because he's last year's Ducati, not the current.
He's last year's Ducati. Yeah. He's not on. So next year he will be on the current Ducati when he's joining Pecco Bagnaia at the Ducati factory team. But that's absolutely insane. Like, I just think he's so close on getting that win because multiple times now he's starting from the back row. I don't know what is keeping him from doing better in his qualifying session. This time we know that he was held up. Yeah. Which it just unfortunately is something that happened. So he never made it into
the last,
Q2
yeah, exactly.
or Q, I don't know.
There was, there
I
was
think
some,
they do two
yeah.
qualifying, right?
But oh man, it was so frustrating. But then we were not even at the end of the race yet, guys. So we had, of course, so Marc Marquez ended up in. Now we know he passed his brother. But then what happened in the front, Jorge Martin there was a moment where Bagnaia was leading and then Jorge Martin ended up leading again. He was driving out in the front. There was a while where he had like a second lead or like.
So Jorge Martin was leading the race for the majority. So after that, Bagnaia was never in the front.
Yeah, no, he was.
But never in the second half of the race.
They
never passed.
No. It was at the beginning. He was in the front for a couple laps, and then they switched again, and then that's when Jorge Martin went away, and there was a little bit of a gap. It was like 0.8 seconds of a gap, and then slowly towards the end, Bagnaia put more pressure on him, and the gap was getting smaller.
Like half a second
and smaller
with like 3 laps to go.
Exactly, and then I think with 3 laps to go, turn 1, Jorge Martin goes into the corner, and
so essentially the whole time we were actually watching Bastianini and Morbidelli fighting on the big screen.
Yes.
And then there was this smaller screen on the top left where you can kind of see Bagnaia and Jorge Martin, but there's obviously a half a second gap. So because they were not fighting at the moment, they were only in the small screen. But I was just telling you in that moment because I knew what would happen. I was like, oh yeah, I got to keep an eye out on the front.
And I was like, why are we watching it? Because there was like still a half a second, and there was so much action happening between Bastianini and Morbidelli because they kept going back and forth, back and forth. I'm like, why am I watching it? And then luckily I looked briefly because then I just saw somebody sliding across the track, and it turned out Jorge Martin made a mistake and he crashed out turn 1, I think, third to last lap, and he was out of the race. I mean, he was so frustrated. I believe it. I mean, I get it. It's nobody's fault but his own, really.
Yeah, he can't blame anyone else.
Yeah.
Obviously, Bagnaia, good on him for keeping the pressure up. I'm sure he was maybe like, he had that in his back of the mind. I'm sure when he's passing the people by the pits who are holding up the signs, that there was like, okay, the gap is closing.
Yeah, and he also said that he had noticed a couple laps prior that Jorge Martin was starting to make a few little mistakes. So I'm sure he could taste the blood, like he
Bagnaia.
knew. Yes.
No, but
Bagnaia could taste the blood, and exactly. I feel like, oh, there's a chance,
And yes, and then also it goes into what Pecco was saying, that he thought that Jorge put too much, like went out. So he put in a gap, and he put a lot of pressure and a lot of wear and tear on his tire towards the beginning of the race. So I am sure Bagnaia's plan the whole time was like, okay, I'm going to save him, and then I'm going to give it all, and I'll have more grip. And that was probably a combination. Once again, we didn't really see all of those mistakes because there wasn't really a focus on Jorge Martin. I mean, I do believe that you can see it. You can probably see as the driver more mistakes than we would see as novices and viewers.
Yeah.
But yeah, then he slid out. He tried to get back on the bike, but then he immediately was out. There was no way he was going to get out of that gravel trap.
Yeah.
By himself.
Yeah. So and it ended up Pecco Bagnaia ended up winning the race, 4th race of the season for him.
4th race in a row.
Is it 4th race in a row?
I believe so, yeah.
Oh, wowzers. All right. Well, good for him. Then 2nd place, Marc Marquez. And in 3rd place, Alex Marquez. His first win of the season. 2 brothers on the podium. The first time since 1997. I mean, absolutely incredible. I was so excited for both of them, especially Alex, because he was celebrating like he won the race. And I mean, it's nice to see that Mark was just so happy to be on the podium with his brother. I'm sure that's also just such a special feeling. And the commentators were also saying that a lot of fans or some people talk a little bit of trash about Alex, that he is just on the team because Mark is on the team, but now he proved himself.
Yeah, but and also you don't make it onto the podium if you suck.
No, exactly. So that's what they're saying. Like, he proved himself. And then he also got a contract extension. He's staying with the team, and Marc Marquez is moving on to the Ducati factory team with Pecco, which is going to be very interesting next season.
Yes. So this also, not that I wish Jorge Martin unwell or anything like that, but this did blow up the championship again, because now Pecco Bagnaia is in first place of the championship with 222 points, and then Jorge Martin is in second place with 212 points.
So only 10 points difference between first and second. If Jorge would have won and Pecco would have come second, it would have still just been 10 points difference, but then of course the roles would have been reversed. So it's still so close and so much can happen.
And then Marc Marquez is 58 points
behind the first
place. So there is still, I think we're right around the halfway mark, I think, for the season, also for MotoGP, just like we're with F1 now.
Yeah.
So that means, however, it's really exciting because even the fourth place is 11 points off of Marc Marquez's third place. So there's still so much that can happen.
Yeah.
So it's very, very exciting.
Yeah, it's really exciting, especially also because Bastianini, who is fourth overall right now, he was fighting. I mean, he got stuck in a lot of traffic, so he didn't make it up quite as much, but he ended up he did end up in front of Morbidelli at the end.
Sorry, I just realized it's Ducati Lenovo. Are they sponsored by the laptop?
I guess so. Must be.
Love it.
But yeah, it was such a fantastic race. If you've not seen it, definitely go and check it out if you can. If you have 45 minutes to spare.
Worth it.
Yeah, and also, which I thought was really interesting, they said at the end that this race today, today because we're recording it the day of the race, was 12 seconds faster than last year's race at the Sachsenring. I'm like, isn't that crazy? I think it's crazy. I think it's really impressive. That's a lot of time.
That's a lifetime in racing.
That's 12 seconds is a lot.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, so I mean, as you can tell, I'm a fan. Yeah, I'm a fan now.
It's so good, and it's really it's kind of awesome because this is also our first season watching MotoGP, and that we're getting such an exciting season.
Yes.
And we all know that Jorge Martin is not out of the race for the championship yet. He has now a 3-week pause until the next race, and he will have, which will be in Silverstone, and he will have a lot of time to think about what happened. He will come back really, really hungry.
Yes.
And he has been overall really, really fantastic. And maybe also that longer break that we have now will kind of give him a chance to get Bagnaia out of that hot streak.
Out of the momentum, kind of.
Because we've seen that in Supercross, where people are really hot, they're winning back to back to back, then they go on a break, and then they don't come back as hot.
Yes.
So, I mean, the breaks were longer in Supercross, but you don't know, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm very, very excited. 3 weeks, we have a little bit of a break now, and then we'll be back, and I'm very excited. I don't want to miss any more races.
No, and then also exciting is there's still a bunch of open seats. Is that how you call it?
Yeah.
In MotoGP, so there's still some movement happening for next season as well, which I'm looking forward to since this is the first time we're actually following it.
Yeah.
So let me know, or let us know in the comments below. 1, of course, if you watched the race, what were your thoughts on it? And 2, if you have any input about how some of those seats that are still open are going to be filled. I'll be very curious to find out. I also wonder, I haven't followed it yet because, as I said, this is our first season, but if there's going to be more rookies on the track.
Yeah, from Moto2
or not. We haven't
know.
Personally followed Moto2 yet because I think it would have been too much following all of it.
I was thinking that earlier. I was like, maybe next year.
Yeah.
I'll take a look at Moto2 and maybe also Moto E, of course, peek into Moto3, but it's just a lot because we tend to watch also a little bit of F2, and then there's of course other racing besides MotoGP and F1.
Yeah, we're trying to watch as much or
diverse. Yes. I think a lot of times GT racing takes a shorter stint.
Yes.
Because I love endurance racing, but it's hard to find 4 hours when in 4 hours time I could watch MotoGP, F1, and probably an
F2 race,
or F1 Academy race or something like that. So but we're trying.
Yes. But yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Remember to always leave us a little like and a subscribe. Very much appreciate it.
Yes.
And then we will see you guys here again at the Daily Racing Show with Race Plaza Media.
Bye, guys. Bye.